So in this video, I'm going to be showing some of PixelCNC's canvas editing capabilities. Editing the canvas pertains to the creation and editing and modification of canvas layers, which you can think of as just individual objects that are either loaded from image files, vector files, model files, or created directly in PixelCNC itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up our project's canvas here by clicking Canvas Properties while in Project Canvas mode. And in here, this is the default canvas resolution, 100 pixels per inch. This is what I tend to use depending on the project size. Large projects probably should use a smaller resolution unless you have a specific need for a higher resolution. If there are details that you need to capture in your project, go ahead and increase the resolution. Just be warned that linearly increasing the canvas resolution creates an exponential increase in the amount of computation required whenever you're working with the canvas or generating toolpaths. And generating raster layers from paths layers, that sort of thing, can take 4 times longer just from a doubling of the canvas resolution. So I'm going to leave this at the default of 100 pixels per inch. Let's do a canvas size of 8 inches. Well, let's do 12 inches by 8 inches. Apply. We'll keep it at a 1/2 inch tall. So here's our canvas volume. This is the volume that toolpaths are confined to when they're generated. And it's also the area within which that you define your project's canvas by compositing your layers together. Layers do not have to stay within the canvas. They can be hanging off the edge, but it's only the area within the canvas volume that is actually relevant. That includes when you're tracing a layer to paths or the canvas to paths, which I'm going to demonstrate here by first creating a text layer. Now, each layer type that can be edited, under layer actions, there's an editing mode that you can enable from right here. So we can click that, and now we're able to edit the text using the keyboard. Let's see, CNC, and then I will choose a font and set the size to fill up the canvas. There we go. Done editing, done. All right, so here's our canvas right now. We just have one text layer. We can either trace the layer, the text layer itself, to paths, or we can trace the canvas as a whole. Right now, because we only have one text layer in our canvas composition, both are going to produce the exact same result. So let's see, trace canvas to paths. Now, when you're in trace to paths, you will see this green plane that you can move up and down with this knob right here on the dialog that pops up. And one cool trick is that if you hold down Shift while adjusting these knobs, anywhere in the interface, actually, it will actually magnify the change that is incurred by the mouse's forward and backward movement. And conversely, if you hold down the Control key, that will reduce the amount of motion. It will scale it down so that you can do more precise adjustments. So you can also see that we have a trace offset parameter here. That allows us to offset from the layer or canvas surface outward if we use a positive value. A negative value will instead offset a trace inward inside or underneath the canvas. And air threshold just sets the precision that our trace is performed at, the number of nodes that will be in our generated paths layer. So let's see, this is generally fine at 50%, and we will start with the trace offset of 0. Your trace plane, and this applies to some of the CNC operations that also do a contouring operation on there. You want to generally use 50% height. You want to use the middle plane of your project's canvas, because otherwise you can get some of this aliasing that occurs as a product of your canvas being represented as a height map. So if you see here, if we zoom in, you can see that the plane where it's following this edge now has a bit of a stair step. And as we move up through 50%, it smooths out. And as we get towards the top, it's the same thing up here, just inverted. Gets a little stair steppy on there. So we are going to use 50% for this trace, and we just click trace, and there we go. You can see that a path layer has popped up here. We can select that, and there it is. And we can see that it does a really good job of tracing the canvas. You can see a little bit of slight imprecision here and there, but generally for an artistic project, these are not things that are a problem. And this is on a very small scale too, so And this is also affected by your canvas resolution. Any of the generative and tracing functions that you can use in PixelCNC are directly impacted by your canvas resolution. So what you can do is set your resolution high while you're working with your canvas and designing everything. And then before you generate toolpaths, you can go ahead into canvas properties and reduce it down to what you want to use when you're actually generating your toolpaths. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is show offsetting a trace path. So if we hit trace canvas to paths, we will offset this by 100,000ths outward away from the canvas or the layer, which right now we're just working with the canvas because we don't have a layer selected. Trace, and now we have a second layer that's actually pushed out from the canvas surface. And if we go -50 trace, now we have a third layer, which I will select here, that you can see that's inside of our text layer shapes. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is show some of the path layer editing capabilities and some of the generative functions that you can use to create all kinds of different shapes and forms that you can composite into your project's canvas. So let's see. First, I'm going to hide our text layer so that we can just see our paths. Right now, you can see that the path layer we have selected is highlighted. If we select these other layers, you can see that they become highlighted as well. So first, we're going to start with our first paths layer, which had the 0 offset. So this is directly following our text layer's form. And we are going to do a stroke paths. So right here underneath the path editing function, we can click stroke paths, and we see here that we have a brush profile that we can adjust right here with brush shape. We can go from a nice spire-like profile to a square profile, and then we can set the brush diameter as well as the height or value of the brush. So we'll set this at about 50%. And the brush value pertains to a percentage of the paths layer's height. So right now our paths layers that were automatically generated by PixelCNC, they are a 1/2 inch tall, filling up the full height of our canvas. So at 50%, that means that any stroke paths we perform are going to be 1/4 of an inch tall, half of a 1/2 inch. So let's go ahead and set this down smaller. Let's do about 1/8 of an inch brush stroke. And we will do a slightly rounded brush stroke. Stroke paths. All right, and there we go. So you can see that right here, a raster layer has popped up right above our paths layer that we just stroked. And we can select that. Let's hide our paths layers. And you can see that we have some nice lines that we can use in our project now. Now, stroke paths can be performed on the entirety of a paths layer that's selected, or while you are in paths layer editing mode. So first we need to unhide our paths layer. I'm going to hide the raster layer that we just generated. We can go into edit paths, and we can select by holding shift and dragging a rectangle. We can select a specific set of paths, and then we can perform a stroke paths with that. So let's see, let's go a little bit fatter and a little bit higher. Stroke paths. So now we've generated a new raster layer that is only those paths we had selected. A lot of the generative functions in PixelCNC only pertain to the paths that you have selected. If you have no paths selected, it will still apply the generative function to all of the paths. So let's see, we can hide that raster layer. Let's go back to our paths layer. Now what I'm going to show you guys is my favorite function, shapes from paths. This allows the creation of all kinds of shapes from closed paths, paths that meet beginning to end that form a closed circuit. Open paths are just ignored by this function. Now you can see here that we have 4 little shape previews here: flat shape, chamfered shape, fillet shape, and round shape. With the flat shape, we will be generating a raster layer that effectively is our paths layer extruded. Now, the vertical size and position of your paths layer determines the actual nature of your shape. So right now our paths layer is resting. Its bottom plane is coplanar with the bottom plane of our project's canvas. So if we hit generate, we will get a new raster layer that is as tall as our paths layer was. So let's say our paths layer was just about 1/4 of an inch, and our raster layer that we just generated is also just about 1/4 of an inch. So you can see that this does a simple shape extrusion here. Now if we hide that layer, go back to shapes from paths. Let's unhide our paths. Chamfered shape. Now this will generate angled surfaces all along the paths at the angle you specify here for chamfer angle. So we can hit generate there, and they will travel up to the top of the paths layer. And if they meet before they reach the top of the paths layer, then you will have a sharp edge. Otherwise, if they coincide or intersect the top of the paths layer first, such as right here, you will see a flat plane that occurs. So what we can do is hide that raster layer we just created. If we squish down our paths layer and then generate a chamfered shape, you see that now we have larger flat areas on top of our shape. Now the other thing you can do, if we hide that layer, you can also move your paths layer up. So holding the right mouse button and grabbing the bottom layer handle, we can actually move our layer vertically. And you can see that happening here on the corners of your layer. You can see the red lines that show which plane of your layer are inside or outside, above or below the project's canvas volume. So we will position that within our canvas. We can see that the bottom plane of our paths layer is above the bottom plane of the canvas volume, and then also the top plane is below the top plane of our project's canvas volume. So now if we generate a shape, what this will do is extrude the shape up first to the bottom of the paths layer, then generate the chamfered shape up to the top of the paths layer. And the raster layer that's produced goes from the bottom of the canvas to the top of our paths layer. So now we have this extruded shape that has these chamfered edges all around it. The same applies to the other shape types. So if we hide our raster layer, select our paths layer, shapes from paths, fillet shape for instance, the radius of our fillets is dictated by the Z height of the paths layer, just as the thickness of our chamfers is determined by the height of our paths layer. So if we hit generate, we get a filleted shape that's extruded up to the bottom of our paths layer, and then we get these radius fillets here. And lastly, let's see, if we hide that raster layer, rounded shape. This is my favorite shapes from paths function. And if we, let's see, this generates basically a fillet that has a varying radius, and the radius varies by the width at each point along the shape. So right here, you can see this is a narrow area on our paths layer. That means that we're gonna have a very small fillet that's rounded over. These larger areas will have a larger radius up to the thickness of our paths layer. So let's see, if we hit generate. All right, it looks mostly the same as our fillet layer that we generated. Let's see, show you the difference. So you can see the thing with the fillet layer is that if the radius is bigger than the thickness of the layer, you will get these sharp edges that form. But with the rounded function, we get these nice rounded shapes like this right here. This is what looks the best, these nice organic looking shapes. And if we go ahead and hide those layers, select our paths layer, we will, let's see, turn magnet on, move back down to the bottom of the canvas, raise that up a bit. Shapes from paths, rounded shape. Now we have nice big round shapes. This is great for generating all sorts of organic looking shapes and forms. Some other programs might refer to this as inflate 2D shape or something to that effect, because it, in a sense, is like treating the original shapes as almost like elastic sheets that are being inflated. Very cool feature. And of course, once again, the raster layers that are generated, they determine their resolution from the canvas resolution. So if you need these shapes to be more precise, higher resolution, just turn up your canvas resolution. They will take longer. Once again, a doubling in canvas resolution is a quadrupling in computation time. So just be aware of that. These generative functions will take longer, stroke paths, shapes from paths, that sort of thing. Okay, now it's just a simple little design trick I'm going to show you guys. If we select one of these other paths layers we generated, all right, this one that was offset outward, we can do a stroke paths with our rounded shapes that we generated. And let's see, let's do about like that, 1/4 inch, and I want more of a rounded brush profile. Stroke paths. So the layer is hidden right now, but we had it selected, so you can see it in red. So now we have these crazy outlines on here. Let's try that again. I'm going to try something a little different. Let's make the brush a little smaller. See if we can get a little bit rounder and a little bit shorter. Stroke paths. All right, there we go. That's more like it. So now we're getting some really complicated effects going on here. Just from a text layer that we created, traced the paths, and then we did some generative functions on those paths layers. All right, so now the next thing I want to show you guys is the paths layer editing capabilities. I'm gonna hide all these layers, find out which paths layer I would like to edit. Oh, let's do the first one. Okay, we're gonna unhide that, and then we hit edit paths right here. So now in edit paths mode, we can select paths by left clicking them. We can select multiple ones by holding shift while clicking on them. And we can deselect individual paths by clicking on the selected ones. And we can deselect all of them by right clicking away from them all. When you have a path layer selected, you can also select the individual nodes in a very similar fashion by clicking them one at a time. And you can select multiple nodes by holding down shift and clicking on them. Nodes can be moved around once they're selected. So now that I have these 4 nodes selected, I can move them around with the mouse by left click dragging them. And we can hit undo to put them back. We can also right click them individually to delete them. You can't delete a node that's not selected. You can, however, delete an entire path by right clicking it when it's selected. All right, let's undo that. Put all our nodes back. By holding down the control key, the selected nodes have their control points changed to where they can be grabbed individually. And if you hold down the Alt key while holding down the control key, now you can move the control point symmetrically. And holding down shift while moving nodes around. This also is the case when moving layers around in the 3D view. It locks the motion to the dominant axis. Okay, let's undo that one more time. And we can deselect the nodes by first doing a right click, and then another right click will deselect all of our paths. Okay. Now, one thing you can do, if you load a vector and it has too many nodes, you can use the simplify paths function right here on the selected paths or on the layer as a whole if you do not have any of the paths selected. Simplify paths, we have a simplify threshold here. So this basically controls the number of nodes that it's going to remove. At a low value, a path that does not have very many nodes probably won't see very many removed. So we click simplify. There, we can see right here it says it removed 58 nodes from one path. But let's see, if we increase this 26%, now we removed 34 more nodes. Now another function you can use is the subdivide paths. This is for when you have a path that does not have enough nodes. This will insert new nodes between each pair of neighboring nodes. So if we just click this, now there's twice as many nodes. And we can click that a couple more times, and now we have a lot of nodes on our path. Not necessary in this instance, but there are situations where that can be useful. Another really cool function that I want to show you is the ability to sweep paths. So first what I'm going to do is create a new layer. Let's see, new paths layer. Let's hide this layer and go into path editing mode. And then what we are going to do is hold down Control to place new nodes. So first what I'm going to do is draw a simple path to use as my rail. This is the path that serves as the rail along which we will be extruding some profile paths. So I'm going to right click to deselect this node, and now I can start drawing some profile nodes. So I like to do a little sort of triangle shape. Then I like to do a little bit of a round shape. And then this sort of U or maybe capital M shape. Okay, so we go sweep paths right here. We select our rail path and click use selection as rails. Then we can select, using the shift key, our profile paths, add selection of profiles. Okay, so now you can see that they're standing up along our rail path. So we can click each profile up here and adjust its position along the rail path. We will position them, let's see, we'll just spread them out along the path. One thing to pay attention to is that along your rail paths and as well as the profile paths, it will show you a green dot and a red dot at the endpoints of the paths. This is to denote the beginning and the end of the rail sweep. And for the paths, it shows you which way that they're going to be oriented. So for instance, if we select this node on this profile path and we lower it down, you can see that its orientation is set to be from left side of the rail to the right side of the rail, and the sweep will be traveling in this direction along the rail. Okay, so let's put that back a little bit, and let's go ahead and generate our sweep. All right, we're a little bit cut off here. Let's go increase the size of our canvas real quick. All right, so now we can see our full sweep right here. Go back to edit paths, sweep paths. So you can see here that it extruded our triangle shape, blended it into our rounded shape, and then blended that into our MU shape. Now what we can also do is, let's set this up again, use selection as rails, add selection of profiles. We're gonna double up on our add selection of profiles so you can see that we added this set of 3 paths twice to our profiles list. Now we can position all of these really wherever we want. They don't need to be in any specific order. PixelCNC will automatically sort them out based on their position along the rail. So we can just go like that, and let's hide our last layer there, hit generate, and now you can see that we're getting some really elaborate shape blends going on here along our path sweep. Another thing you can do is do a dual rail path sweep. So what I'm going to do here is add another rail path. Okay. Let's select that with our first rail. Use selection as rail. So now we are resetting our rail selection to include both rails this time. Both paths, rather. Use selection as rails. So now what you can see is that all of our profiles are spanning both rails. The situation here, though, is that now when we click a profile, there's a second slider for the second rail. You can see that all of them are still set to the center of the second rail. So we can start moving these around. Let's see if we can organize these a bit better. Okay, so now you can see all of our profiles here. This looks like it might get cut off by the top of the canvas right here, this large M shape. We will hide our last raster layer and hit generate. Boom! Now check that out. So yeah, we did get cut off here. The layer is just taller than our canvas. But you can see here that we have some really neat looking blendy shapes going on here. This makes it really easy to do all kinds of flowing organic shapes like leaves, petals, stems, anything ornate. Those are the kinds of things that you can do with a path sweep. All right, so that's it for this video. We've gone over tracing paths. We generated some strokes along those paths, which generates raster layer that we can then composite into our project. We also generated shapes from closed paths using the shapes from paths function. And I showed you guys how to edit path layers as well. And then we finish off with generating some path sweeps, designating a rail path and some profile paths to do a single rail path sweep, as well as designating 2 paths as rails to use for a double rail sweep. All right, thanks for watching.